The cream of the crop of all steaks. Wagyu. This is American Wagyu. And this is Japanese. Wagyu literally means Japanese cow. So what's American Wagyu? Is it different than Japanese? Is one better than the other? How's it graded? And is Wagyu better for your health? Hey friends, my name is George Gianaris. I'm a chef for 36 years, and if you're here, it's because you like to eat healthy, save money, and cook like a pro. In the previous video I did on Japanese Wagyu sold at Costco, I got a lot of comments. There are a lot of misconceptions about this elite meat. I knew it was only a matter of time before I'd do a follow-up video, and I didn't want to just rely on the internet and my own research. I wanted to bring in a professional who could tell me about Wagyu. This is Austin Meats. They've been providing me my burgers along with almost all of my meats at my restaurant since 1986. They're one of the largest distributors of high-end meats on the East Coast of the United States. Mike is one of the owners, he's a good friend, and we go way back. Recently, I've become close with his son Austin, who handles procurement of the Wagyu and other high-end meats for the company, including all natural and pure grass-fed beef, chicken, lamb, and exotics. Hey Austin, I just want to welcome you to the show. Thank you so much for agreeing to be here on this episode. I have a million questions for you, and I'm so thankful that you're here to answer them for me, man. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks, George. Happy to be here, and looking forward to answering these questions.
Well, all right, first of all, let's get a little background here. When did you start working for Austin Meats?
Sure. Started off as a child. My father's one of the owners of the company. They started off in the early 90s. And so as a kid, winter school breaks, I used to work in the warehouse, did some of that through college as well, graduated college, went into the professional world. And then in 2017, joined the company. And so what I'm involved in right now is I do sales, I do purchasing, I do logistics, I do some stuff with operations. So I wear a bunch of different hats.
But I mean, you're the guy who's responsible for ordering some of the finest meats you can get for all of the East Coast of the United States. Is that right?
Sure. Yeah, we're the largest distributors of Wagyu, whether it's Japanese Wagyu, American Wagyu, Australian Wagyu. We also do specialties like Berkshire pork. So those are two of the big categories that I'm doing the purchasing for the company.
So do you purchase Japanese Wagyu directly from Japan?
We do get it directly from Japan. And so this is the famous snow white, super rich looking steaks that have become pretty popular in the last couple of years.
So the word Wagyu means Japanese cattle. So American Wagyu is Japanese cattle raised here in the United States, right?
That's right. Yeah, there's a couple different things. Like there's full blood Japanese Wagyu that's raised here in the United States, and then there's also a crossbreed between the Japanese Wagyu and the Angus. It's like a 50-50 breed. It's called F1 Wagyu.
Okay, well let's just get into that a little bit later. Let me just ask you this about the American Wagyu that is raised here in the United States. Do you purchase directly from cattle ranches that raise Japanese cattle here in the United States?
Yes, we do. Yeah, it's definitely not as common. It's much more scarce, but we do purchase that.
Okay, so you have American Wagyu, you have Japanese Wagyu. What's primarily the difference between the two?
So if you're comparing full blood versus full blood Japanese versus full blood Japanese in America, it's really just how long they feed the animals. So typically in America, the American Wagyu is 400 days on feed, and then the Japanese in Japan is 650 plus days on feed.
When you say full blood, you're talking about the lineage of the American Wagyu, the American cattle, the Japanese cattle has not been crossbred with any Angus. It's basically just been brought from Japan to the United States, and then here the full blood Wagyu is fed for 400 days consistently, and then in Japan it's 600 days. Is that right?
Yeah, there you can get the same genetics, and it's over here in America now, but most of the Wagyu, American Wagyu, is F1, that crossbreed.
Right, that crossbreed. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's just because it generates a different type of flavor steak, I'm assuming, or meat.
Yeah, the American Wagyu, the F1, and even the full blood is just much more similar to what Americans are used to eating, like that steakhouse style type of New York strip steak or boneless ribeye. It's if you just think of those though, the American Wagyu, it's that to another level.
Right. Oh yeah, definitely. And so in Japan, from what I understand, they basically feed their cattle nothing but grass, and here they don't. Is that right?
Yeah, here in America, most of the Wagyu is fed grain. There's some farms and some really small farms that'll do it, but you're just not going to get the same type of marbling within the meat that the U.S. consumer is demanding.
So in Japan, they don't feed the cattle grain?
They do. They feed it grain as well. They have
Really?
a mix. They do a mix. Yeah.
Interesting, because most people feel that Japanese Wagyu is strictly, I was under the impression it was strictly grass-fed, but that's not the case. And I thought about that too, because how can you get such a heavily marbled piece of meat by feeding the animal nothing but grass? I mean, usually that's not the case.
Yeah, there's just a lot of confusion in this space, whether even within the meat industry, it's just there's a lot of confusion in that, and oftentimes it's just not very clear. But yeah, you're not going to get that type of marbling if it's just on a pure grass-fed diet, even though their genetics are predisposed for that type of marbling. You just won't get that on a pure grass-fed diet.
What's the main difference? I think the main difference is, from my research, is between Japanese cattle and other breeds of cattle, is that the Japanese cattle, the Wagyu or the American Wagyu, is primarily, most of the fat is mono unsaturated. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, that's the biggest difference. But by far, out of any type of beef out there, they have they're known for their mono unsaturated fat, and that fat will actually start melting at room temperature.
Right. It's right. Yeah, I noticed you touch it and it just kind of melts right in your hands. And also, if I'm not mistaken, the fat that is inside of Wagyu that is not mono unsaturated contains a very high level of stearic acid, if I'm saying it right, and it's supposed to be pretty good for you, right?
Yeah, definitely. It definitely is.
Basically, American Wagyu and Japanese Wagyu have the same healthy fat characteristics as one another. There's no real difference. It's because it's basically the same cattle. So if you're able to get full bloodline American Wagyu raised here, you're getting exactly the same cattle as if you were purchasing beef directly from Japan, from Japanese Wagyu, except it's raised differently.
Yeah, you can get pretty much the similar, almost similar bloodline. It's pretty much the same bloodline. But yeah, they're just raising it differently. They're feeding it differently. They're feeding it longer. And then they're raising it differently. So, that's part of the reason why the price is so high of the Japanese Wagyu from Japan, just due to everything involved in producing that meat. If you've never seen Wagyu in your life and you see an American Wagyu steak and you're comparing it to USDA prime, if you have a high grade, high marbling score, which means intermuscular fat content, you're going to be blown out of the water when you see that American Wagyu. And now you look at Japanese Wagyu, that's on a whole nother level. It's pretty beautiful to look at, in my opinion.
I think it is too, but just like most beautiful things like honey, you shouldn't really eat too much of it, right? I mean, you're not going to have a nice 2-inch thick, 32-ounce piece of Japanese ribeye, Japanese Wagyu ribeye.
You're going to get pretty sick if you eat that. I mean, I'm sure some people can handle it. I definitely can't, and that's why when you typically see Japanese Wagyu served. It's thinly sliced shabu shabu style, cooked in like a little bit of hot oil, and you could even eat it raw. We see that too.
I don't particularly like my Japanese Wagyu anything less than medium rare because it becomes almost gooey. It's a little difficult to eat, whereas I can easily eat a American Wagyu medium rare and be very, very satiated and happy with that flavor. And to me, it really resembles dry aged more than dry aged. And that flavor, it's almost like the flavor of the fat is so delicious. It almost imparts like that dry aged characteristic to it.
From what you're right. Like Wagyu beef definitely has that more intense beef flavor. And when people dry age, regular beef, that's what they're trying to get. They're trying to intensify that, trying to enhance that beef flavor, and you get that with the Wagyu. And with the Japanese, you just have so much fat. If you overcook it, the fat will just render off.
Oh, it's terrible. I actually took a piece of Japanese Wagyu in one of my other videos, and I ground it up to make a meatball out of it, thinking it would be the best meatball I've had in my life. It was terrible. Yeah, it was just horrible. It was not good to do at all. Explain the grading system for Japanese Wagyu.
It's really confusing, and honestly, a lot of people who know meat really well, they get these things mixed up as well. You typically only see A5 Japanese Wagyu marketed, and then within the A5, there's other gradings, and you could have a lower grade to a higher grade, but A5 alone, it's going to be some of the best looking stuff you see out there.
So A is really a letter we shouldn't really be concerned with. That's more about yield. It's kind of like an industry standard, right, for the actual meat producer. So A, B, or C is not. It just means that's how much meat was actually taken away from the animal, right?
True. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is really what we really should be more concerned with. And in the United States, I've never even seen like A4 or A3 Wagyu anywhere. Like it's always A5.
Yeah, you don't really see it. It's really like the A5 is what people want here. That's like the celebrity, the buzzworthy grading of the Wagyu.
Now let's go to something very confusing, which you mailed me a chart here. I'm going to post this to the beef grading scales. It's like that'll make you twitch. I wish they didn't have the prime, choice, select. I always forget. Like I know prime, that's it. That's the best. You go with prime. That's the end of it. It seems like choice, select, choice plus, choice minus is so much here. So how do they grade U.S. Wagyu? Like, is there a grading system for that?
Yeah, and that's a good point. You bring that up. Like, there's a lot of people who I talk to, and they're like, "Hey, can you get me a prime Wagyu cut?" And the American Wagyu does not go by the USDA grading scale. So USDA grading scale is they have stuff that's ungraded. It's not even on there. That's the lowest quality. And then the next level up is select. And then there's choice. And then there's prime. Prime is the best grading that USDA will grade beef. So they do not have that in American Wagyu. And American Wagyu equivalent, you start on a scale of 3 and you can go up to 12. Anywhere from like the 3 to 5, that's pretty much equivalent to like USDA choice in terms of the marbling. Then you go higher, 5 to 7, that's prime or higher. And then when you get to the 8 to 9 range, that's definitely higher in terms of marbling. And then you have the 10 plus, the 10 to 12, and in that type of territory, sometimes you can get marbling that's pretty close to what you see on the Japanese A5.
Oh, I see. So basically, if I want to get an American cut of American Wagyu and I want it to resemble Japanese Wagyu, I'm going to look for a number of 10 plus. And if I really want to go for broke, then I should go with like the full bloodline 10 plus Wagyu, and then I'd be getting like the cream of the crop.
Absolutely. And it's rare that you'll be able to find a steak that's going to have that's going to look like that Japanese A5, but it is out there. It is possible.
Right. Okay. So, but at that point, you're probably just better off just going for the Japanese, same amount of fat.
Yeah. Actually though, the American will be cheaper. It will be cheaper.
Well, yeah, for importing and stuff like that. Yeah. So, just to recap, as far as that, and then we'll end it. Bloodline, full bloodline, Japanese cattle. F1, it's crossbred with, say,
Like an Angus, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Perfect. Well, here's something that I got nailed on pretty heavily for in one of my YouTube videos. And you had sold me a while back some American Kobe. It said American Kobe on the packaging, and to me that was the best steak I've ever had in my life. And when I announced that online, people flipped out. They're like, "You can't get American Kobe. It doesn't exist. Kobe only comes from Kobe, Japan." And people like literally, like in the comment section, crucified me. I had to actually put a disclaimer up saying, "Look, I bought it. I know it exists. I actually going to put a picture of a label of the recent batch that I bought from your company." And so, tell me a little bit more about that misconception that Kobe cattle does not exist in the American market, that most people think doesn't exist.
Yeah. At one point, Japanese Wagyu from Japan was not legal to import into the U.S. So, a lot of that sentiment and that comes from that. And so, and I still hear people say that, like, no, it's impossible to get Japanese Wagyu, authentic Japanese Wagyu in the U.S. It's illegal. So you still have some of those people, but it no longer is illegal. So there's some of that. But also, there is confusion too, because like Kobe is a place in Japan. So technically, Kobe beef should be Wagyu beef from Japan. So, when Wagyu beef first was introduced into America, it was sort of like the Wild West, and it was just anyone, however you really wanted to market it. So a lot of these things have perpetuated over time. And there still needs to be a lot of education and clarity on a lot of these things.
Right. And also, if I'm not mistaken, it would resemble, like, let's say champagne, right? You are not allowed to call sparkling wine champagne unless it comes from Champagne, France, right? So I'm assuming that if you're going to be selling authentic Kobe beef, it should come from Japan, but it hasn't been standardized or it hasn't been trademarked in that way yet.
Yeah, and one of the things with the Japanese the Wagyu beef from Japan, we get, when we purchase it, we get the birth certificates, we get an actual nose print of the animal. It's like a fingerprint, but of their nose, and that identifies the animals. And because this meat is so expensive and it's very scarce, the consumers really they really want to know that they're getting the real stuff.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I know I certainly like to know that I'm getting the real deal, and that's why I buy everything directly from you. I mean, we've been doing business for a really long time. Your father, by the way, he sells me my burger meat. Has been since 1986. So, one day you might actually tell me what kind of cuts you put in it, but I hear it's like a top secret. I know my burgers are off the charts, and I owe that to your company for sure. But getting back to some of the full bloodline Wagyu, what would be a company in the United States that sells pure full bloodline Wagyu?
One of the companies we actually do a lot of work with, one of our partners is Morgan Ranch. They're one of the few that offers full blood Wagyu.
I had when you had sold me some of that from this wine pairing dinner that I did, it was one of the most remarkable pieces of meat I've ever had in my life.
Their meat is unbelievable. Their meat is so good. It's sold all around the world. They export it. It goes to Michelin rated restaurants all around the world, and cities all over. And so it's not a huge farm, but the quality is top notch and highly sought after.
I've bought a lot of different types of Wagyu from you. I've purchased both Japanese and American, and I got to be honest with you. And again, this will probably get me crucified on YouTube, but just to be candid, I prefer American Wagyu over Japanese Wagyu.
I'm with you, George. Every once in a while, if I'm going to have some Japanese Wagyu, like, it's a nice treat. But to me, it's amazing, but it's more of a novelty to me. The American Wagyu, like, I'm a type of guy who grew up eating steak all the time, and going to really, like, New York City, we have amazing steakhouses, and just having that type of experience when you have the American Wagyu, it's like that. it's even better than that. So
it's not really a fair comparison. You can't. It's like comparing, like Japanese Wagyu is like comparing a Lamborghini to like the new GMC electric truck. They're both 1,000 horsepower, but you're not going to tow a boat with a Lamborghini. You know what I mean? It's like they have a different purpose. If you're looking to really buckle down and have a big steak, and you do that with American Wagyu. You just don't do it with Japanese Wagyu. That's a very select sliver. Yeah, we're beating a dead horse. Yeah.
That's a great analogy. Yeah.
Yeah, you know. I dry age my own steaks. You know that, and I don't really do that anymore because the cost of prime steak, when you shrink it down, it costs maybe more than a piece of American Wagyu, and it doesn't taste as good as the American Wagyu does right out of the get-go. The only time that I really would dry age my own steak now is if I want a porterhouse, because it seems like it's almost impossible to get American Wagyu porterhouse. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. You know, everything you mentioned about the dry aging. Yeah, you have a lot more waste, and it's a longer process to make. And yeah, it's expensive. It almost comes out to around the same price of Wagyu. So value-wise for me, I'd rather eat the Wagyu. And in regards to doing your dry age of Wagyu, you know, it's good enough. It's so good. It doesn't need to have any more enhanced beef flavor, in my opinion. And just the availability of it. Porterhouses do come available from time to time, but most of these plants and farmers, there's such a high demand for their boneless middle meats. So they're New York strips, they're tenderloins, to make filet mignon. They just do it boneless, and they sell them separately. So
right. And now you also sell an interesting thing. I know you sell dry aged meats as well, and
yes.
you sell something called wet aged, and that's, I know it's not terribly new, but it seems to be new to a lot of people. What exactly is wet aged?
Sure. Yeah, both are tasty. I enjoy both. Really, the difference is dry aging beef. You hang them, or you put them on racks in open air in a refrigerator that's close to freezing temperature, and you leave it in there for about, for weeks up to a month sometimes. And that's the dry aging process. The wet age, you just leave it in its vacuum sealed bag, and you leave it there for days or weeks, and you let it naturally tenderize in its juices. And so when you open it up and you cook that steak and you eat that steak, it's a more flavorful, tender steak than if you were to just open the bag and start cutting the steaks right there.
Does it shrink when you wet age it?
Well, you're gonna get some shrinkage from the blood loss, but it's not gonna shrink like when you dry age.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool.
There's much more loss when you dry age.
Now, I'm sure a lot of people are probably jealous that I get the most amazing steaks in the world from you, because your company is one of the largest distributors of exotic meats fine high-end meats on the East Coast of the United States. But it's not only a blessing to me. From what I understand, you guys are launching your own website soon that's going to be direct to consumer. Is that right?
Yeah, we're really excited about that. We're revamping our website. It should be launched soon. And one of the lines that we're coming out with is called Authenticity Provisions. So it's a direct-to-consumer line. It's also a retail line with different items. The base of this line is everything under it's going to be premium culinary style cuts. So we want to give people that high-end restaurant quality experience, but have this product being able to deliver right to your home, and you can cook at home, So, for all the people who enjoy cooking, they like experimenting with food. Like, this is the base of your meal this is the base of the proteins for your meal to cook something amazing.
Cool. I'm looking forward to it. So you're going to give me a link. I'm going to put that down below. I'm also going to keep talking about it in my future videos. So when it does finally go live, which would be very shortly from this point on, it probably only take a couple weeks before you guys are actually live. We'll definitely have you back on the show, and I'll cook up some of the beautiful meats that you guys are selling directly to consumers, and that is going to be a lot of fun. Hey, Austin, man, thank you so much for taking out. I know you're a super busy guy, and I really appreciate you just being on the show and clearing up a lot of the misnomers about Wagyu and educating me and educating everyone else. Thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it, man.
Welcome, George, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. And looking forward to doing more work with you.